All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Angular's Missing Guide. I'm at the other Zach on the Twitters. I mentioned earlier that this is a beginner level talk. If you know from Angular, then you will probably be pretty bored. As an aside, that is my Twitter handle. I am just 30 people away from 1,000 followers. Hint, hint. All right. It took me 3 weeks to get used to Angular when I first started. It took me 3 weeks to become productive. And I'd done a fair amount of front-end work before then. There's no reason for it to have taken that long. Had I started with these five crazy tricks to trim belly fat, then I would have been up and going in a day. So this is a letter to past Zach, hopefully to help him out. And if anybody else finds it useful, then that's great too. Once again, my name is Zach Briggs. I'm a developer and an instructor at TestDouble. TestDouble is a boutique consultancy. We don't have any physical location. We're distributed. We live in your heart. We're known for solving hard problems that keep smart developers from getting bored. You should shoot us an email. Something at testdouble.com. Join at testdouble.com. One of those. And some of those hard problems that we're known for solving exist on the client. So today what we're going to do is I want to briefly go over some client-side history. Where we're coming from, where we're going. Then we're going to look at those 5 concepts, and then we're going to use those concepts together to compose a sortable, filterable grid. Really basic stuff, but I build a lot of line of business apps, so I know it's something I find really useful. And then I'll have some suggestions for where you might want to look next. All right, history time. 1995, the Netscape Corporation ships Navigator 2.0. This has support for the script tag, the brand new script tag, and a language called JavaScript that was designed and developed in 10 days, and boy does it show. In 1999, Microsoft shipped Internet Explorer 5. This is the first browser with support for Ajax. Might be 5.5. Does anybody know if that's 5 or 5.5? 5.5, thanks. Love it. And so this is the first time we can asynchronously make a request and pull back data from a server without a full page refresh. 5 years later, this bears fruit with Gmail. Google ships the first single-page app, Gmail. There's a reason why Gmail is often cited as the canonical single-page app. It's because it quite literally is. We are building Gmail class applications whenever we're building a single-page app. In 2006, the jQuery era begins. This is not the first DOM manipulation library. This isn't the first Ajax library. But this is for whatever reason, this is the one that takes off. Not only people that have never written front-end code before start writing front-end code with jQuery. People who have never written code at all start writing jQuery. And boy, does it show, right? This is the jQuery spaghetti era. And so much client-side code, so much JavaScript is hitting the browsers. The browser vendors have no choice but to up their game, but to optimize their JavaScript engines. So an arms race begins. So we get a ton of JavaScript in the browser, therefore the browsers get faster, and suddenly, since JavaScript's faster, that means we can write more JavaScript. So it's this self-reinforcing cycle, right? 2011, new era, Backbone. Backbone actually originally shipped in 2010. It's extracted from Document Cloud, and it doesn't actually do much. It brings conventions to our jQuery, pretty much. But this allows us to build slightly more ambitious applications by giving front-end developers conventions. In 2013, the Angular era begins. Angular predates 2013, but this is the year, for me, where it really hit. Because this is where Angular gets very I'd say stable, performant, and just easy to use in production.
I think it's really neat. If we look at these dates, 20 years ago, we don't have JavaScript at all, right? 15 years ago, was when like the first browser ships with Ajax, right? It's like an experimental Chrome feature that nobody can really deploy to because it only exists in one browser. Ajax, right? Not even possible outside of 15 years ago. 10 years ago, it was the first single-page app, and it takes a Google level of engineering effort to build, right? You see where I'm going with this. 2006, it's democratized. We all have the ability to make little tiny DOM tweaks. 2011, we now have the ability for a pair of us over a month or two to build Gmail, right? Gmail no longer requires a Google level of engineering effort to build. And now in 2013, you could mock up a prototype Gmail-like app in like a week with a pair of people. Be a little multi-processor, but it'd be pretty freaking close. Compared to 10 years ago, where it was taking hundreds of human hours to build the same thing. That's probably 2 orders of magnitude worth of productivity increase over a decade. It's exciting. This stuff's neat. Like, I'm generally a pretty cynical, curmudgeon-y person, but this stuff's exciting if we zoom out enough. So, with that being said, let's talk about why Angular, especially why Angular versus some of the technologies that have come before. First of all, it's concise. I just talked about an order of magnitude or 2 productivity increase over a decade. jQuery is a fairly low-level library. It doesn't really do much. It just abstracts a little bit of the DOM away from us. Angular, however, allows us to do things like a sortable, filterable grid. However, we don't sacrifice flexibility. We've been able to do things like sortable, filterable grids forever. Who here has used data tables? Good old data tables, yeah, right? Who here has regretted using data tables? The one-to-one relationship. I love data tables. It's an open source project that's also for sale. You can pay for software, right? You don't have to wonder what's going on. Like, I genuinely like the project, but when I regret it, it's not really data tables' fault. It's a black box abstraction. When the client, whether that's internal or external, when the client asks for a feature that goes slightly beyond data tables' capability, then you kind of just pose. Unless today's the day, you wake up, you look in the mirror, and you realize today's the day that you altered the data table source code on this project, because we've been down this road before. It's not a great day. With Angular, you get similar functionality, similar library download size, and all of that flexibility. So now let's talk about how to actually do this stuff, right? Like the thing that the talk is supposed to be about. This might be the first time I talk about the thing like abstract claims I talk about. The 5 concepts. So really quickly, we're zero indexed. So we've got 6 concepts. I'm not going to read these off, but I just wanted these on a single slide for posterity's sake. So concept 0, ng-app. This isn't really part of the composition of applications. This is more foundational. You need to know this stuff. And this is going to be the only static slide of code on it, just to show you how this stuff works. Now, ng-app on the screen is a HTML attribute, just like ID or class. No different, except for how it's different. So it's a custom attribute, right? It's Angular knows to look for it. And when Angular finds it, it will then parse that HTML tag and all of its children, but not its peers or parents. So to make this more concrete, and I apologize for how small this is. We'll have some videos that are going to be a little bigger than this. You see the Angular is parsing that 1 plus 1 and then displaying 2 because it's inside of ng-app. Everything outside of ng-app, Angular won't touch. So if anybody's had experience with Backbone, and you've needed to do checks for whether or not a certain ID is in a page, whether or not it does its thing. Has anybody ever run that check in old code? I'm going to be the only one. Okay. Well, it's a thing, and it sucks. In this case, we don't have to. Handlebars. The little double mustachios. This is the templating system that Angular uses. It's not the official handlebars.js, but it's a handlebars-esque templating. As for today, all we need to know is, so long as we're inside of ng-app, if Angular finds the little double curly braces, then it will treat whatever's inside of it as a JavaScript expression, evaluate it, and then display the result of that expression on the page. Right, and it takes a lot of words to describe, but when you see it, like right here, it's just really natural. So here we're gonna update that H1 so we know what section we're in. It's important stuff. Just type out that raw 1+1, just like the slide we saw before. We save it. I've got live reload going, so the web page reloads, and we see just the 1+1, right? This is HTML. We don't have any Angular yet, but we surround that with a div. We add ng-app, and then the things I just said, right? Holy crap, that becomes a 2. This is pretty neat, right? There's no backing code yet. And we just to, once again, display how the scoping works. We just add another 1+1 outside of that div, and Angular doesn't touch it because it's outside of ng-app, right? Now we're gonna try something here. Call it the thumbs up, thumbs down, whether or not you understand what the hell that's saying. So if this makes sense, give me a thumbs up, and if it doesn't, give me a thumbs down, and somewhere in between. Okay, so a lot of thumbs up, so we can move on. All right, so it turns out that every once in a while I'm asked to do something other than adding 1 and 1 inside of HTML. Not often, but clients are a pain in the ass. So let's go ahead and figure out how we tie Angular to some frickin' JavaScript, right? We're updating, in a very precious fashion, we're updating that title. Now we're going to set that ng-app attribute to app. And notice that 2 goes away and that 1+1 comes back. Well, what you can't see is we just threw an exception because we told Angular a lie. We told it that we have a module called app. And it went to look for a module called app and it couldn't find it. So it blew up and that 2 became the 1+1 again. And this is how I actually develop my code. I try to keep ridiculous statements kind of scattered throughout my front end just before I get into my TDD cycle. So that way, when I inevitably mistype something, then it blows up loudly. I like things to blow up loudly and quickly because I'm not that smart. And I don't want to have to go through a bunch of my code to figure out what I screwed up this time. So you'll see that 2 become a 1 a lot. All right, now we're going to go ahead and declare a module, and the way we do that is by calling .module, calling the module method on the global Angular object. We hand it two arguments, and you notice as soon as we do that, that 1+1 becomes a 2 again, right? Sort of like a bathtub red-green refactor cycle. Those 2 arguments are just those 2 arguments in module are just how we set it, how we declare it. If you ever see Angular.module with 1 argument, that's not a module setter, that's a module getter, right? And we've got plenty of seats up front if this is small for anybody. For anybody who's coming in late who's in the back, don't be shy, you can come on up, you won't disturb me. All right, so that was concept 0. Now we're ready for the first real concept, ng controller. This is how we get stuff onto the actual page. So first, we're going to declare a controller called myController. And so we set another HTML attribute called ngController. Set that to myController. Once again, our page breaks. That 2 becomes a 1+1. So at the bottom, we call Angular.module. We pass it a single method, not 2. That's because we're now using Angular.module as a getter, not a setter. We call the controller method on that, right? And as soon as we finish that, we save it, and the web page updates and it becomes 2 again, right? We pass. So if we look at what we're passing the controller method, passing it the string. So line 3 on the bottom, we see my controller, matches line 9 on the top, my controller, right? So, and then the second argument is just a function, right? It's not inheriting from anything, it's just a plain old JavaScript function, and that's our controller function. And most of the rest of the talk, we'll see us playing around inside of this controller function and updating the template up top. All right, now we're going to assign our module to a var just to reduce the number of characters on the screen. So it's just say var app equals angular.module, right? And that assigns our module to app, and now we say app.controller instead of all that fun stuff. Really simple, it's just to make it a little easier for you all to see. Now we're going to talk about magic. At no point today am I going to explain what scope is, but hopefully through context, you pick up how it's used, and if that's not enough, then raise your hand and ask questions. So like that question back there. You can, but there's about 18 different ways to match up a function with an Angular controller. So that's just the way I chose to do it today. All right. So now we're going to add a formal parameter called $scope. That's what those things inside the parentheses are, right? Formal parameters. And now we're going to say alert scope. So I apologize, that alert box can be really small. The important bit here is that it doesn't say undefined. It says object. That means we have a thing. It's because of Angular's magical dependency injection system. When your Angular stuff, when your formal parameters match certain words that Angular is looking for, it'll inject the right stuff. There's a few other things in addition to $scope, but $scope's the only thing we're going to be talking about today as far as the DI goes. But this is read more about it at your local library thing. Once again, today, $scope, magic. All right, now we're going to add an attribute to $scope. Just say scope.foo equals this is foo, right? Not earth-shattering stuff. We're just assigning a thing to an attribute. Now we're going to replace that 1 plus 1 with foo, and boom. With that much code, now we have arbitrary strings in our HTML. Essentially for free. I mean, just with this much minimal setup, right? And attributes aren't the only thing we can add to scope. We can also add methods to scope. So we're going to add one called var. We're going to say scope.var equals function that returns this is bar. And then I'll wait for past me's typing to catch up. Maybe drink a little bit of tea. Tea, wet. All right, replace foo with a bar. And unsurprisingly, as soon as I hit save, the page refreshes. This is the bar method. And notice the open and closing parens after the bar. Can anybody in the audience explain to me why we have to have those? We're calling a function, right? If we just said bar without those parens, if at some point Angular would actually display the function body, I think. It doesn't these days. But the bottom line is if you forget the parens, it's just like in JavaScript when you forget the parens. And you will. No matter how long you do this, you will. This is the dark side of first-class functions. All right, concept number 2. These get quicker now. ng model. Now we're gonna re-add that attribute to scope. Once again, we're going over these concepts multiple times to make sure that we fully understand it. This time we're just starting with foo. Angular doesn't care that foo doesn't exist yet. Foo snuck on the page a little early because it was in the code prior to me saving. I apologize for that. And now we say scope.foo equals foobang, right? Now we're going to bind that foo attribute via ng model. So now we add an input element, and we say ng model equals foo. That updates, we get our input box, and then this is the canonical Angular demo, right? There's just as I typed, the DOM updates. I've never actually built this feature in production, but it's a heck of a demo, right? It's this useless feature is really hard to do in background, so it's fun. But it's still really cool though, isn't it? Like with all the code that's necessary to do this is on the screen right now. There's nothing hidden. This is pretty neat stuff, I think. So that should be it for ng model. I was confused by the name ng model at first because I come from backbone Rails background, and models are a little different there, right? They typically deal with persistence. Here, ng model just means two-way data binding with an input field. That's it. Concept 3, ng submit / ng click. This is where we get some additional behavior. So we're going to bind ng submit to a form now. So we're going to just surround our input field with a form, and we're going to say ng submit equals go. Now we're going to add a button as well. We don't have a go method on scope yet. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, we save it. Now we see the go button appear in the DOM. Now we're going to add a method on scope called go, right, with a function, and just throw an alert in there, right, and say hi. Save that. The page updates, and when I click go, hi, right? Really simple. Just a few lines of code, and now we get really basic behavior, right? Next, we're going to make it a little bit more interesting, and we're just going to pass the model into our function, right? Just to kind of show common patterns for using this stuff. So rather than say alert hi, we're saying alert my param. And we hit go, and now that alert says undefined. That's because we haven't changed go up top. Now we're going to actually pass in our model foo. We're going to hit go again. Now that says, take my word on it, that says foo bang. Anything I typed into the input box would have showed up there. So I want to poll the audience again to see how everybody's doing. Does this feel pretty clear right now? Thumbs up, thumbs down. This isn't about your understanding. This is about my ability to explain. I don't expect everybody to be keeping up. Seems like we're doing okay though. So we're going to look at concept 4 now. So we're at 4 out of 5. ng repeat. So before I start with ng repeat, I always have I love feedback. So I love just dumping my collection to the view first, just to make sure everything's set up right. So I'm just going to say scope.things. I'm going to set that to an array, 1, 2, 3. And then on top, I'm just going to say things. Like, hey, let's see if this stuff works. Like, yep, we're not using ng repeat. We're not iterating over this. We're just dumping it out. But it exists. So that way, when I inevitably screw up ng repeat, I don't have to wonder whether or not I even have access to the data. Right? I just like to verify every single step to simplify my debug. Now we're actually going to use ng repeat to render the array. So we're gonna throw an unordered list up there. We're gonna surround that with list item tag. We're gonna get rid of things, and we're gonna say just thing, just the word thing. And we're gonna say ng repeat thing in things. And now you see the literal word thing is displayed 3 times in a row. We're going to inexpertly surround that with curly braces. Hit save, and now we see 1, 2, 3. Now there's a couple interesting things going on here. Angular uses DOM-based templating. So unlike other templating systems, it's not concatenating strings. It's using the actual DOM nodes resident in memory for its templating, which means when we iterate over a collection, we actually need ng repeat on the element that's being repeated. This is different from other templating systems that I've seen that use something that looks closer to a for loop. So in Rails, for example, and I think in other stacks templating systems, you'd surround that list item and you'd loop. Here, it's actually on the list item, and thing is, of course, sort of like our block variable, right? Each of those elements, as it hits it, it actually adds a new a child of scope. So we could have a parent scope attribute called thing and still have our ng repeat thing and things work properly. So give me a little bit of unnecessary information, but I personally think that ng repeat is Angular's killer feature. Rendering a collection in Backbone is a massive pain in the ass, and this, as you can see, is essentially for free. Go ahead.
So you mentioned child scopes and naming concepts. Is there a way to block up the scope tree if you wanted to?
There is. Don't, but yeah, there is. All right, concept 5. Filter. Angular has some great built-in filters. We're just going to look at one, the order by filter. Camel case doesn't really show up well in all caps fonts, turns out. All right, so let's make a slightly more interesting array. Still 3 elements, 3, 45, and 1. So when we saved it, it displays 3, then 45, then 1. Then the pipe operator, the frickin' pipe operator, yo. Then order by, and suddenly our array is displayed in order. Angular uses the pipe operator in a fashion which is reminiscent of Unix's pipe operator, right? Under the covers, order by is just a special filter function that is given the array as its first argument. And there's a bunch of other filters. I recommend that you read about them in your local docs. All right. Those were our 5 plus 1 concepts. Now let's put them together. Let's build a sortable, filterable grid. All right, let's start off with some fixture data. Just a couple random songs. It's called song fixture. I wanted to call it songs fixture, but it just sounded wrong. And say scope.songs equals song fixture, right? And same things before. We're just throwing that out to the page just to make sure everything is hooked up properly, right? Before I go on, any questions on those basic concepts? Have a hand.
Controller.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that Angular is very MVC centric. How are you defining the whole model then? If there's a controller?
I'm so glad you asked that. I did not pay this man any money. The model in Angular is a JavaScript object. It just uses plain old JavaScript objects. So that's the very unsatisfying, boring answer, unless you're a functional programming or object-oriented programming nerd, and that's a really exciting answer, because that means you can do anything with your own code, and then just plug those freaking models right in Angular, and Angular takes them and runs with them. So essentially, that's up to you to come up with the models. Go ahead. So you need both. You yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Asking about the difference between ng-app and ng-controller. So you need both. So I'm not sure how well you can see it, but up top, I've got ng-app equals app, and then inside of that, I've got ng-controller. And that's because, and there's multiple controllers, so you can slice up your app. And then often you'll reach for directives, custom directives, which are similar to controllers, just like you said, for scalability. So everything's not in just one big pot. So good question. Go ahead.
If you were writing a website with Angular, would you do one app for the entire website?
You know what? Yeah, I go back and forth. Yeah, there's reasons why. It's primarily because once you list those dependencies and all your custom services, you have access to all of your dependency services too. So it kind of doesn't make a difference.
Do you ever worry about all the JavaScript you're loading at once?
No, and that's because all the numbers I've seen indicate that you're better off concatenating, for the vast majority of use cases, you're better off concatenating and minifying your JavaScript because you're better, because of caching, assuming that the people coming to your sites, and your server's properly set up for caching, then they'll download less code because even if there's a few K extra here and there, they're probably not re-downloading the same file on every page request. So that's also why I'm not a big fan of require.js, but that's another topic. All right. So that's managed. And it's on the other hand,
Is there any difference between putting ng submit on your form or just using ng click on the button?
okay, the question, good question. Is there a difference between ng click and ng submit? I like using ng submit with forms so that way people can just hit enter or return and then it fires it. Not sure off the top of my head, but it behaves more sanely in a form situation, and I'll use ng click if it's a one-off button. It's usually whether or not I have a text box. So I think I saw a couple other hands, but I'm going to keep going just to make sure I have enough time to get through all the stuff, and then and then I'll just take questions until they kick me out of the room after that. All right, so we just threw the collection right into our view, and now we're just going to build an HTML table. So this is boring, but I think this is important for at least my learning style. Maybe somebody else is in the audience, but once again, this is all about me. When I'm watching a screencast and somebody just pastes a crap load of code right to the screen, I kind of panic a little bit. And even if it's simple stuff, like I have to pause it and study it to figure out what the heck's going on. Right here, you're just watching me type out the table elements. But once again, I think it's important for you to see where everything goes. Oh, and we're also adding the table class to the table because Bootstrap. All right, and so we've got and we're just call this song instead of sortable grid. My clients always get irritated when I put sortable grid as the title for things. All right, and straightforward stuff. Once again, just an HTML table. So next we're going to look at ng repeat and iterate over our collection for our HTML table. All right, and so we're going to add another table row. And once again, since we are using DOM templating, we need to put ng repeat on the element that we want to repeat. Even if it doesn't look tricky, if you're used to the other way, it takes a little while to get used to it. And we're just going to put something in there. Let's call it hi. So that way when we first start ng repeat song and songs, as soon as we hit save, we say hi, hi, hi 3 times, right? So now we're just replacing that hi with song.name. All right, and so now we have the song title. I guess probably should have called it song title, huh? And now song artist. Right, so once again, right there, that many lines of code. You just it took 30 seconds to type it out, right? This would be a really long session if this was jQuery doing this. Now we're going to filter this grid. So we're going to see a brand new type of filter in here called the filter. Angular also has a service called service, so I'm sorry, that's not my fault. All right, so we're just adding a new input field up top, added a model to that input field called query, and now we are going to filter on that query. So I'll explain that syntax in just a second, but just note that as I type, it filters down the list based on that, and it works automatically across the name or the artist, which is like frickin' black magic. Yeah, I get that's little. It's a little non-interactive. It's a downside. But up top it just says input ng model equals query, and so you notice the colon syntax on filter. That is a extra argument that we're passing to that filter function. So it's still just JavaScript underneath the covers. It's just Angular's syntax for their filters, which is
which is enjoyable, but it's a little different. It's interesting that they kind of came up with their own DSL for that. But it allows you to chain one filter right after the other. Go ahead. Sorry, would you mind repeating?
Can you target on a specific attribute? Like I only want to filter on name, or by that syntax and do everything, always.
So the question is, can you filter on a specific attribute, like just name, or is it just, or is it always everything? It's not, so in theory, this is a really interesting question, and I'm not sure. So to be perfectly clear, I'm not sure, but it never seems to come up for me. Whenever I build something that's filterable, nobody seems to want an interface where they have to select what they're filtering on. They seem to be pretty okay with being able to type anything. So yeah, like I'm pretty sure that there's got to be a way for you to filter just on a specific attribute. I just don't know it off the top of my head because it doesn't seem to come up.
I mean, if you put in like multiple words, is it still searching for that exact expression that you're typing in there, or is it kind of like searching for each keyword?
If you type multiple words, it's not like tagging. So if I typed Seawolf in there, it would just bring up the third element in there. So it wouldn't be too hard to do a space delimited set of stuff. You just parse what was coming off of ng model. You just like split it, right? All right, I'm going to keep going with the demo here, and then please keep interrupting me with questions. I think we're doing okay at time, so we're going to be okay. All right, so now we want to make this a filterable grid, so that way when we click on a column header, it sorts it, and that way, and when we click again, it sorts in the other direction. So this, there isn't anything, this isn't quite as automatic as filter, so we have to write a little bit of code for it. So we're going to start by just adding ng-click to our column headers. So we're just going to wrap our headers in an A tag. Just real quick, just adding call the order by, which doesn't exist yet. So we're just going to say scope.orderBy, and we're going to have a formal parameter called column name, right? We're just passing the name up top, line 15, and we're going to say alert column name, right? Once again, this is just a really small step to make sure that I'm not sniffing glue. And holy crap, the code works, right? So once again, you'll see me making a lot of really small changes, so that way I don't have to look very far for when I make inevitable typos. And we surround artist with another one and pass in artist, right? So is anybody confused by the hard-coded artist string up there? Okay, cool. Any questions on this one? This was a fair amount of stuff. Okay. All right, now we're going to declare a new attribute on scope called predicate. This will be the column that we're sorting by. So just for debugging purposes, just to make it crystal clear what's going on, we're going to temporarily display the undeclared predicate. Just say, and we're going to say predicate : predicate. So when we save at the bottom of the page, it just says predicate : because predicate is still undefined. And inside of the body of our order by method, we're saying scope.predicate equals column name. So now, when the page refreshes, we click on name, and holy crap, name appears, right? Click on artist, holy crap, artist appears, right? So now we are tying behavior to mutating state inside our controller. So from there, we'll now sort on that predicate. So we'll add another filter method, another filter function to our chain here, and pipe into order by : predicate, the attribute we just defined. We hit save, that page refreshes, and now when we click on artist, it sorts by artist, and we click on name, it sorts by name. Now, when we click on artist multiple times, it doesn't reverse the sort. We still need to add that functionality, but for not too much code, we got column sorting, right? You know, we're up to 4 or 5 lines in our controller. For a sortable grid, it's getting kind of beefy, it's getting kind of hairy, but I think we're still okay. So let's go ahead and let's just pull our 6 shooters out and go ahead and reverse that sort a couple times.
All right, so we're going to add another attribute to the scope. We're going to call it reverse. So reverse colon, and then the yet undefined reverse. Back down her controller. We'll initialize reverse as false. And then we're going to say scope.reverse equals bang reverse, not reverse. Nice, it's a little clever, but I felt pleased with myself enough to keep it. And then now we still aren't reversing our list when we click on the headers multiple times, but we are toggling that reverse attribute, right? So based on the previous examples, you can see I'm setting up to go back to the filter function in this slide. So now we're just going to add another optional argument to our order by. So when the page refreshes, click multiple times and it goes back and forth. So we're going to just delete those two debugger statements at the bottom because we don't really need to see predicate name at the bottom. We'll filter on something so that way we can filter and sort in both directions at the same time for what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code. I think let's give Angular a round of applause for being awesome. 7 lines of code, right? This is 80% of data tables right here, right? So like everybody that raised their hands that they regretted pulling in data tables, this is about the same size as data tables. It only took 7 freaking lines to build it. And you can also use this to build Gmail if you're so inclined. It's pretty okay. I like it. I like it a lot. All right. So real quick before we go into what's next, do we have any questions on what we've seen so far? Go ahead.
Question. So the data we were working with there, it doesn't quite work with this, but say you had something like, artists and stuff.
I'm going to have to repeat your question, so, okay.
All right.
Okay.
Suppose you have this nested JSON, you've got
Yep.
multiple albums per artist.
Mm-hmm.
Would you display it as something, would it look a little different in terms of if you have would it look something like artist.name.albums or?
So the question is, if you have a nested data structure, so if you have objects nested within objects, then you can absolutely string some dot syntax together. That's no problem. And if you have, say you have arrays nested in arrays, or if you've gotten like a big array on the outside and then an object in another array, then you just nest your ng repeats.
All right, cool.
It works pretty okay. Todd Kaufman's sitting over there. He and I last year did a bunch of workshops on Battleship clone, and it's just nested ng repeat, and you have your Battleship grid done. Sorry, again.
You were mentioning the name of the column into your method. Why didn't you have to do song.name, song.artist?
So the question was, why didn't I have to say song.name or song.artist? Let's see if I can. Yeah, so see ng click order by artist. That's just a string. So I'm just because that never changes. I've got and right above that order by name. It's because we're not I could iterate over like all of the keys in the object, but rather than doing that, I'm just hard coding name, hard coding object. But if that was part of an ng repeat, I'd have to do like key name or something like that. All right. One more.
When you describe or when you define scope.orderBy, what's the relationship between that function you defined and the filter? Like, I sort of understand, but I'm not really clear.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So order by is a custom method that we just added to scope right there. So in the slide right here, order by, the only thing it does is it alerts that column name. It's
Does it happen to be named the same thing as filter?
Ooh, that is something I totally did. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, they are unrelated. Sorry, everybody. I shouldn't have named a scope function. I shouldn't have overloaded order by. Sorry about that. Good call.
All right, I want to go over the what's next first, and then I'll take the, anybody else's questions. What's next? Okay, so this is just a checklist of what I think you should learn next, because I have opinions on how you should spend your time. I recommend the $HTTP service next. $Scope is actually a service, so is HTTP. There are high-powered libraries out there to give you backbone-esque functionality for your persistence, for your async calls. There's something called Breeze.js, which is really interesting. However, as you're getting started, I recommend you just stick with $HTTP until you are forced to, until you're just tired of typing the same thing over and over again. Don't reach for that extra complexity until you really need it. $HTTP works for me like 80% of the time. It's fine. It's like, it's their built-in async stuff's pretty okay. ngIf, this is how we show and hide elements. You can do it with just the things we've seen today, but it's far more elegant using ngIf. ngCloak, when I told my friend Brian Sheff about my talk ID, he said that I should just do it completely on ngCloak. And he's right, I should have. All 5 points should be ngCloak, and I'll let you explore that one in your own time. Custom directives. At some point, as my delightful coworker Dave Mosier pointed out in his pre-compiler, you get too much logic in your views, in your templates, and custom directives are how you can kind of abstract that away and to reduce duplication, dry up your stuff. And if you are forced into routing on the client side, I'm a big fan of server-side routing because HTTP has worked since 1991 or so. It seems pretty okay. But if you want to reinvent routing on the client side, and every once in a while it does make sense, I recommend Angular UI Router, or even better, Ember. Ember.js is rad for big single-page apps. And that's all I have. Once again, 270 followers? No, question?
What other JavaScript libraries do you use, like underscore or something like that?
So the question was, what other JavaScript libraries do I use? I use underscore because sometimes you need iterators and you don't want to have to worry about things, right? And that way you don't have to worry about if you have a map, right? Beyond that, I just try not to. I hate third-party dependencies.